April 1863. As possible statehood looms near, 6,000 Confederate troops tear into Western Virginia. The Union command under General Roberts is surprised and unprepared.
Imboden proposed a raid in the spring of '63.
It was clearly the longest Confederate raid in the Eastern Theater of the American Civil War, and it was really intended to disrupt the birth of the state of West Virginia.
General Lee, the following damage has been done to the main stem of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Every bridge but two of any importance from Oakland to a point 30 miles west of Fairmont has been destroyed. The splendid iron bridge at Fairmont, over 600 feet long, was blown into the river. All the others burned. General Jones burned the bridge and trestling at Bridgeport. I drove the enemy 1,500 strong from Beverly. They also fled from Buckhannon, destroying their camps, stores, ammunition, and so forth, and burned all the bridges from Beverly westward. The Union men have all fled before us. We have collected and sent to the rear over 2,000 head of good cattle, and General Jones alone has got over 1,200 fine horses for the government. Rumor reaches us that you are at work toward Parkersburg, and that we might get together this week. If we do, I believe the Northwest is saved. Yours respectfully, J.D. Imboden, Brigadier General Commanding.
Imboden came back down towards Summersville, and Jones went on over towards Burning Springs, where they did have some real success. The fledgling petroleum industry, which is not important in the Civil War. Coal was still the resource for heating and burning. But there was a fledgling oil industry there just north, in Burning Springs, just north of Charleston. They burnt that field down, burned up some 150,000 barrels of oil.
We moved on to Oil Town, where we arrived May 9th. The wells owned mainly by Southern men, now driven from their homes, and their property is appropriated either by the federal government or Northern men. This oil is used extensively as a lubricator of machinery and for illumination. All the oil, the tanks, barrels, engines for pumping, engine houses, and wagons. In a word, everything used for raising, holding, or sending it off was burned. The smoke was very dense and jet black. The boats filled with oil and bulk burst, with the report almost equaling artillery, and spread the burning fluid over the river. By dark, the oil from the tanks on the burning creek had reached the river, and the whole stream became a sheet of fire. The burning river carried destruction to our merciless enemy, and was a scene of magnificence that might well carry joy to every patriotic heart. General W. E. Jones.
The Jones-Imboden Raid is a really interesting thing to study. It certainly threw a scare into an awful lot of people. It took the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, which was a critical supply line for the Union armies operating in the Eastern Theater, out of commission for an extended period of time, probably the longest period of time it was out of commission. So it did have an impact on the logistics facing the Union armies. But most of all, it created a lot of fear. I'm not sure terror is the right word, but certainly fear among the people who were trying to bring this new state of West Virginia into being.
And they accomplished quite a bit. Thousands of cattle and 1,200 or so horses. They didn't get very many recruits. That part of it was a failure. They did disrupt the West Virginia government at Wheeling for about a week. They adjourned for about a week as the raid got close to Wheeling, and then they came back.
Well, the biggest problem that you have with the Union forces in Western Virginia is they had an awful lot of ground to cover. They didn't have necessarily enough men to cover it. The command was largely put in stationary positions up until the Jones-Imboden Raid, which meant that they were not able to effectively counter a long-mounted operation.
They bring a new commander in to take charge of the troops in West Virginia. They're going to bring William Averell to come in and reorganize the forces.
When General Averell assumed command of these troops, he found himself with a brigade of loyal and courageous fighters scattered through half a dozen counties, but who knew little of discipline or of regimental or brigade maneuvers. They were scantily supplied with approved arms, equipment, clothing. They were insufficient for any reliable defense of the country, and the utter hopelessness of any effort to take the offensive. All the officers and enlisted men were war students with no teacher. General Averell was a West Point graduate, had been an instructor in the cavalry school, had distinguished himself as an Indian fighter, and in the Civil War as a colonel of the 3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry. He came to the command of the 4th Separate Brigade with a ripe experience that fitted him well. Theodore Lang.
Averell was a professional soldier. He was a guy who unfortunately was plagued by being closely aligned with his hero, George Brinton McClellan. And in addition to sharing McClellan's politics, he shared some of McClellan's personality traits, not the least of which were he tended to be cautious. He tended to be not willing to move until he was darn good and ready. But at the same time, he was a guy who was a brilliant administrator. He was a brilliant trainer of troops. Every command he ever had was known for its efficiency and effectiveness.
He recognized that he had to have combined arms, but it had to be very mobile. He wanted to have mounted infantry wherever possible. These would be infantrymen who carry a musket, the major arm of the Civil War, but they're going to ride horses to get them to the battle. They're going to be mounted infantry. When they fight, they dismount. 1 out of every 4 soldiers is going to hold 4 horses while 3 grab their rifles and fight. And so they fight off their horses. They're infantry to fight, but they're mounted for transportation to get there. He's going to have cavalry as well. The cavalry are designed to fight from the horseback itself. They use saber and pistols instead of muskets or carbines.
The period in which General Averell was in command might be appropriately designated as the working, marching, and fighting period of the West Virginia soldiery. For Averell had no inactive service. He was on the go, both in summer's heat and winter's storm. Theodore Lang.
There was no better or more successful raider in the Civil War than William Woods Averell. And what he did with a command that was thrust upon him that he never wanted, to convert it from an inefficient ragtag band of infantry to what became a crack-mounted unit, is really nothing short of remarkable. And the fact that it was accomplished in a short period of time makes it even more remarkable.
General Averell and staff arrived this evening. He is much heartier than when I saw him last. Colonel Oley says Averell is the most particular man for detail and takes personally a rigid account of everything pertaining to his command, even to the horseshoe nails. The routine and discipline of his camp is most rigid and exact. This accounts for the complaints I have heard against him. David Hunter Strother.